Hi guys, Olive here today to review Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy by Mary Roach. This book was published in 2025 by W.W. Norton. The hardcover copy comes in at 288 pages. However, I read an advance e-copy that I received through NetGalley for reviewing purposes. This is science writer Mary Roach's ninth work of nonfiction, believe it or not. And she has written a handful of best-selling books, some of which you have likely heard of, and they all cover a variety of different topics. Everything from the human digestive system to the so-called science of the afterlife to, most recently, the sometimes dangerous and sometimes absurd interactions that can occur when humanity and wildlife come face to face. I would say Mary Roach's thing is suction cupping herself onto a topic that she has become fascinated by. And then she travels all over the world, testing the patience of anyone who has been unfortunate enough to say yes to her very direct line of questioning. And then she communicates her findings about that chosen topic with a hefty dose of humor thrown in there. She's often lumped into the microhistory subgenre of nonfiction. Think books like Salt by Mark Kurlansky, which do a deep dive on one topic. And I understand why she's placed there, but I have found that Mary Roach books kind of live in a subgenre of their own because she incorporates that travel element. She tells stories about her travel, but she also incorporates so much of her personality. That is definitely the case with this new book as well, in which Mary Roach turns her focus to the myriad ways that science has attempted to replace or even just emulate human body parts. As you probably know by possessing a human body yourself, our bodies are very complex machines, and there are so many things that can go wrong with them. Things that make life more difficult, more painful. Things like birth defects, cataracts. We can go through injuries that render a limb non-functional or even painful. Our hip joints wear out. Our organs can begin to fail. You name it, and it can probably go wrong within your body. And throughout history, science has attempted to fix those kinds of issues by trying to create something that could do the work of one of our body parts. And right now, there's even more cutting-edge research being done that will hopefully someday lead to life-changing or even life-saving breakthroughs. The intention of this book wasn't to cover every single medical advancement to that effect. Mary Roach says as much in her introduction, but it was more meant to be an overview, a sampler platter, if you will, because every chapter covers one specific topic, one specific body part, which range from the cosmetic to the critical. So you will learn about things like dentures, hair transplants, silicone implants. But then you will also hear about things like prosthetic legs, colostomy bags, and 3D bioprinting, which is 3D printing, but for live tissue. To report on all of this and more, she goes to a pig lab in China. She takes a deceased woman's iron lung for a spin. She shows up unannounced at a surgeon's office in Georgia, like the country, not the state. She discusses Kim Kardashian's derriere with a plastic specialist in Mexico. She holds a beating heart in her hands in Michigan. She treks all across Mongolia watching surgeries being performed on eyeballs. And she even comes here to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for two different things, actually. She tags along with some biomedical engineering grad students as they're playing mom to growing cells. And then she also witnesses some non-traditional donation material being collected from an organ donor. If that sounds like a lot, well, it's because it is. And that's typically how things go in a Mary Roach book. You do live under the sizable umbrella of a topic when you're reading one of her books, but then at the same time, you're kind of getting ping-pong balled all over the place in a way that can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. It's all fascinating stuff. Do not get me wrong. It's just, I would advise you to take your time if you choose to read this book. I should also mention that this is the most ambitious science that I've ever seen Mary Roach tackle in one of her books. I won't claim that I've read every single Mary Roach book yet. I still have a few in her backlist that I have yet to read, but of the ones I've read, this is definitely the most complicated science-wise. I mean, she's talking about extremely complex medical advancements, even though she does do her best to make everything as digestible as possible for a layperson. She has to use some higher level medical vocabulary because there's really no other way to describe some of these things. I have actually fairly recently brushed up on my medical terminology, and I read this type of stuff for fun all the time because I'm a massive nerd, and still, I'm not going to pretend like I understood everything in this book. Not by a long shot. That heavier material is balanced out by the humor that Mary Roach incorporates into this book. Actually, since most of her books take on more serious subject matter, her jokes provide some much-needed levity, and that is definitely the case in this book. If you've read one of her books before, then you will definitely know her style of humor. It is absolutely on the drier side. It's very clever. It's very witty. She likes plays on words. She's often very self-referential. So she'll make a joke at the beginning of a chapter and then she'll repeat it in kind of a different way in the middle or the end of that chapter. So you're rewarded for paying attention in a very satisfying way. And I also found in this book in particular, she's quite self-deprecating. However, and I did mention this in my review of her last book, Fuzz, in my opinion, her humor does occasionally go a little too far. There was a joke in her last book that I didn't even care to repeat in my review because I found it so off-putting. And then in this book, I noticed that she gets in the habit of commenting on people's appearances. I don't know if that's because she's talking about the human body in this book, so that was so much of a focus. And most of the time what she had to say about people, these people who are taking time out of their day to talk to her, most of what she had to say about them was nice. It was flattering. But on one occasion, she called one of the students that she met gangly. I put myself in his shoes at that moment, and I thought about how rotten it must feel to have given some of my time to this writer when I didn't have to, showed her some of the work that I'm doing that I'm really excited about. I know I'm going to make an appearance in her book, so I pick it up and see that that's what she was thinking about me. Now, is it the worst thing in the world? No, I'm not going to claim that. Is he definitely going to be offended by that descriptor? I don't know. All I do know is that I am not someone who easily gets their feathers ruffled, and yet this stuck out to me just because it was so mean and unnecessary. And it goes to prove my point that there is always at least one instance in her books of her going overboard. I expect it at this point. Another critique I had of her last book that I've had about many of her past books is that although there is that core theme that unifies all of the individual chapters, I found there is very rarely a central message that makes clear Mary Roach's purpose in writing that specific book. I personally think you need more of a reason for writing a book than, I don't know, it sounded fun. Like, what are you trying to say with this book? What's at the heart of it? And when I've asked that of her previous books, I've been left without an answer. But I am happy to report Replaceable You is actually the very first Mary Roach book that I felt had a true takeaway message. Something you can walk away from the book with other than just a collection of fun facts to stick in your pocket. What I walked away from this book feeling is a sense of awe, because you will realize more than ever before after reading this book that the human body is a marvel. And any efforts to emulate it, definitely enough to replace parts of it, are at the very least extraordinarily complex and sadly often futile. One researcher that Mary Roach spoke to throughout the course of the research for this book very wisely likened the human body to a spider web because it's intricate and much stronger than it appears, but it's also delicate, it's fragile, and everything is interlinked. So if one strand goes down, the whole system could go with it. It's that idea that fuses all of these disparate chapters together in a way that I think makes the entire reading experience more meaningful and definitely will make the content more memorable. It's one of the greatest strengths, if not the single greatest strength about this book, in my opinion. But I also wanted to take a moment to highlight just how well thought out the organization of this book was. even though I do advise you to take your time with this book, it's so easy to blow through it because those transitions from one chapter into another are so smooth. She clearly thought about what she wanted to talk about when, so she could make those transitions so easily. And also those transitions provide some more real estate for her jokes, like the segue from chapter 5 into chapter 6 absolutely took me out. I had to put the book down for a while because I couldn't stop laughing. I won't say what that transition is here because I don't want to spoil it for you, but also because I think YouTube would probably deem it inappropriate. A good chunk of this book lives in that territory, actually. I mean, it is about the human body, after all, so expect to hear about all of its different parts, its different fluids. Mary Roach is also a big fan of the cursey words, and there are descriptions of animal testing, dead bodies, things of that nature. If you're sensitive to any of those things, or if you are at all squeamish, I would steer clear of this one. Just to put it in perspective, I have a pretty strong stomach. I read about this kind of stuff frequently, and I was reading one chapter over lunch, I won't say which, and I found out very quickly that that was a mistake. But if you keep this one out of the dining room, I do think it's worth diving into to learn some really cool science, but also to gain a whole new appreciation for your own hardware. But that was my review of Mary Roach's latest. If you want to read this book, or if you have already read it and you want to share your thoughts, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. If you want to get your hands on a copy, I've put links to where you can do so in the description box below. And also in that same description box, just a little bit lower, you'll see something that I like to call the further reading section, where I've listed out some book titles you also might want to check out if this topic interests you. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.